Welcome to Vinyasa in Verse, the podcast where we connect mind, body, and spirit through poetry and practice. I'm Leslie Ann Hobayan. Together, we'll explore different ways of connecting with our innermost selves and how to tap into the flow of the universe. Because once that happens, anything is possible. Your best life starts now. All right. Hello, loves. Welcome to another episode of Vinyasa in Verse. How are you on this beautiful day? I hope wherever you are, you're able to pause, to take a moment, to notice any beauty around you, no matter how small or large, and really bask in that beauty that is available to us at any time, including our own breath. So let's just take a deep breath together here. Inhale through the nose and exhale. So good. So today I have a guest. I'm so excited. I am going to read a little bit about him. So he is the author of 4 nonfiction books, which I think is so cool. The titles, Buddha's Dog and Other Meditations, Southside Buddhist Talk. Southside Buddhist, Talk Thai, The Adventures of Buddhist Boy, and the forthcoming memoir, This Jade World, which I've been hearing about, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. He also writes short stories and poetry. I mean, this person is freaking a master of all the things. A short story collection called The Melting Season and a poetry collection in Thailand, It Is Night. He's won a bunch of stuff. I mean, so freaking impressive, but I want you guys to find out for yourself how awesome he is. But just also so you know where to find him. He is one of the founding editors of Sweet, a Literary Confection, which actually is a journal, we'll talk about it later, that I discovered when you first came forward with that at AAPI, and it was so fun. And then he's also the Richard Thomas Professor of Creative Writing at Kenyon College. So please welcome to the show, Ira Sukrungruang.
Yay! Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Leslie Ann, for inviting me.
Yes, I'm so glad you could be here. After our panel discussion and our reading together a few weeks ago with the Muse Writing Center in Virginia, I thought it was just really great to, we just had really great conversation, and I want to continue that conversation here. So before we do that though, let's open up our show with Hafez's poem from The Gift. We're gonna go through a little roulette. I like putting it right at the mic so we can hear the pages. I don't know if anyone hears it though, ever. All right, so today's poem is called Forgive the Dream. Forgive the dream. All your images of winter I see against your sky. I understand the wounds that have not healed in you. They exist because God and love have yet to become real enough to allow you to forgive the dream. You still listen to an old alley song that brings your body pain. Now chain your ears to his pacing drum and flute. Fix your eyes upon the magnificent arch of his brow that supports and allows this universe to expand. Your hands, feet, and heart are wise and want to know the warmth of a perfect one's circle. A true saint is an earth in eternal spring. Inside the veins of a petal on a blooming redbud tree are hidden worlds where Hafez sometimes resides. I will spread a Persian carpet there woven with light. We can drink wine from a gourd I hollowed and dried on the roof of my house. I will bring bread I have kneaded that contains my own divine genes and cheese from a calf I raised. My love for your master is such you can just lean back and I will feed you this truth. Your wounds of love can only heal when you can forgive this dream. I know you have a disadvantage because you don't have the poem in front of you.
That was beautiful. It was a beautiful reading too. Wow.
So
I think me,
yeah, speak about it.
I keep thinking about how that poem was, and it's in that last line too. But that poem was really about forgiveness, right? Trying to forgive all your past kind of sins and your I think the past that lingers within us that we can't let go of, right? That keep haunting us. Like I keep getting to that. I think one of the earlier lines of that was understand the wounds.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll read it again. I understand the wounds that have not healed in you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, wow, that to me is what we all kind of suffer from all the time, right?
Yeah.
These wounds that haven't healed. And I love the phrasing of trying to understand it, right? Not trying to fix it, not
Mm-hmm.
trying to like, right, but just trying to understand it, get that deeper sense of what it means and why it's there, right?
Yeah, yeah. I really love the differentiation you make about understanding versus fixing, because this is our tendency, right? When we transgress, when we make a mistake, you know, if you're like most people, we like self-flagellate. We're like, oh, I can't believe I did that, or oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And instead of trying to fix it, to understand, I think invites a deeper look at who we are and how we can grow from that moment.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I think, that I'm always thinking about is how our culture is always wanting to solve something,
Yes.
right? Or try to find an answer. I mean, I think in many ways, this is like the issue of like communication that we have. Like we want to try to make things right. We want to have these conversations and try to say, okay, if this happens, this is going to happen, right?
Mm.
And I think the reason why we suffer from the things we suffer from in our culture is that we haven't sat back and really understood or see it for what it really is, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. It's
yeah.
funny because as you're talking, I'm thinking, of course, this is where my brain goes, but I'm thinking about race relations, right? And I'm thinking about the rise in awareness around racism and white supremacy and all these things. Um, but in particular, I'm thinking about the relationship between Black communities and Asian American Pacific Islander communities, and how it feels layered and complicated when it doesn't need to be. But I think part of that has to do with this communication of wanting to fix something, the solving of the problem, rather than sitting back and doing some deep listening and receiving whatever message is coming forward.
Right. No,
What are your
abs-
thoughts on this?
no, absolutely. And I think one of the things that there is a complicated history between Asian Americans and the Black community, but the Asian Solidarity Organization was born in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? I
Right,
mean, if you go to
right.
their website, that's one of the things they say immediately. Um, and one of the things that I keep, that you had just said is that, we just need to stop and listen, right?
Mm,
I think that's the thing that when we start listening, we begin to see, especially from BIPOC communities and LGBTQ circles, that these microaggressions that we experience on a daily, right, is there's a shared commonality between them, right?
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
and 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 that's what joins us, right? That, I mean, in a sad way, right? That our hurt is what
Right.
joins us, but
Mm,
at the same time, there's something beautiful about finding other groups and other people to share these things with, right?
yeah, yeah.
And to listen to other people's stories, right? I mean, that to me is the beauty of it.
Yeah, yeah. But what I'm finding is, so just to give you a little context of where my brain is at right now, is I had watched the most recent episode of Red Table Talk with Jada Pinkett Smith, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the format, but her mom is on the show and her daughter Willow. So the three of them come and they bring a topic to the table, and the topic for this particular episode was talking about the relationship between Black and AAPI communities. Um, and so it was interesting to see the presumptions that GAMI had made about Asians and the Asian community. And what was interesting, they brought Lisa Ling on later, and Michael Eric Dyson, and Michael Eric Dyson had said, if you listen to your language, you are repeating the very language that Black folks hear from white people. So I thought it was interesting that this this pattern is repeated, but the question that comes up is, are people listening? because it really comes to this deep listening of being present and listening, and not necessarily putting the onus on the other, whoever the other is, right? Whether it's I'm Asian and I'm putting it on Black folks or white folks. And so can you speak a little bit on how maybe we can cultivate this skill of listening, of deeper listening?
You know what? It's what a wonderful. I mean, I think I'm gonna have to check out the show. I think that's what a wonderful premise that is, to just have this conversation through generations, right? Like, I think that's such a wonderful thing. I one of the things that really struck me is the idea of listening to the language in which you have within you, right? When where
Mm,
that language is born from and where it has been shaped from, right? And I don't think anyone has ever phrased it that way for me, right? When I teach writing, I'm always telling my students, like, well, okay, let's think about all the languages within us, right? How many
mm,
languages do we have within us? And I'm talking more than, like, one person speaking French or
hmm.
Japanese or whatever. I think to
Or text
us,
language.
right, absolutely, right. We have
Lol. I hear students go lol. I'm like, what?
what's going on? Yeah, oh my gosh, the whole law acronymic language is it's really, that's so new to me.
Right, right.
But I think one of the things that a lot of people aren't aware of is where language is formed and in
Mm,
what ways are put together, right? And I talk about, say, my upbringing of growing up in Southside Chicago, in a really working class area of the world, where when industry shut down, right, like, it devastated the area. And so my language is born from that world. What is that world? That world is a sad world. That world is a hyper masculine world. That world is a sexist world.
mm,
And so when you begin to look at that language that I possessed within me and I've used, right, that's, or sometimes subconsciously comes out, right, I have to now, I think it's having to have the self-awareness of who is within you and who's speaking right now, and
mm.
in what is controlling that what's shaping that, right? And so, but that's really hard. This type of self-awareness is really quite difficult, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think, for me, I try to teach my students that, like, this idea of, like, being self-aware of your own, what you're saying, how you say, and where it comes from, where it's born from, right? But most of our culture doesn't even have that in mind, right? They fall back to what is comfortable, and what is comfortable is
Mm,
usually what our culture has fed them or fed
yeah.
us, right?
Yeah. 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 And if we don't have that awareness, we just do it, and it's this unconsciousness that just then perpetuates the thing that we're like, wait, why is this happening?
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
that self-awareness is like you said, it's a I don't like to say hard, because I hesitate at labeling processes as either hard or good or bad, because then it puts this expectation in our minds of how we're going to proceed. But we'll just say, for argument's sake, that it is hard to create self-awareness. And when people have awareness, they're like, well, I'm aware of that. Now what do I do? you know? So can you take us through that next step? Let's say
yeah.
we have somebody who's aware. Okay, I'll take myself as an example. I am a daughter of immigrants. My parents fled martial law. So that already is a language in and of itself, as much as they didn't speak about it.
Mhm.
That's something that was very present in my upbringing. And so I have this awareness, but I'm still talking like, I don't know, like I'm privileged and white ish, because I grew up in a mostly white environment. So I have this awareness. Now what do I do?
It's interesting, because what do you do with that awareness now? One, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and I've been working on it. I think right now, in the pandemic, in the state of world that we are in, we're faced with more internal conflict. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
the outside world is going to be the outside world. That's something that you can't control. And that's one thing I keep telling myself. I can't control what's going on out there. I can only control what I'm doing and who I have direct effect on. right?
Yes.
My family, those closest to me, right? Like those are people I have direct effect on. And knowing that for me, this pandemic has been, has taken my anxiety up a notch, has taken my anger up a notch.
Mm.
Um, so I'm self-aware of those things. I'm self-aware of when I go into those modes. Sometimes I'm self-aware a little too late, whereas I act too quickly, right? And I say the wrong thing. But even that is a type of self-awareness, right? The after is a self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
for me is to is to be aware not only of the language of your reading, but what prompts, what in the body is prompting you to feel a certain way and react a certain way. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I mentioned this in that panel we talked to. I really been thinking about anytime I begin to feel a rise of anxiety, a rise of sadness or conflict that I'm faced with, I suddenly just turn my arms out like this,
Mm.
right? I opened,
Note to the audience that he is extending his arms
right?
outwardly so his palms are face up.
Yeah.
This is
And,
for our audio audience.
yeah, that's right. So I'm turning my palms, and it's a posture, right, of that strips away um, power or negative power, right?
Mm.
Right. It's a power. It's a position of offering, right?
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I do this, right? As soon as I'm aware that I have to do this, right? This body action, suddenly my brain does something, calms itself,
Mm. Mm.
right? In fact, I was thinking about getting little tattoos on my wrists so that it's a reminder of like, okay, if you feel something, you know, turn your palms up. And it's a Buddhist technique, right? It's an offering of the self. It's a giving over, but also it keeps in check that anxiety, that whatever tension you have in the body. And I'm telling you, in the last month that I've been doing it, it has been my communication with others, my communication with family, has been so much better, right?
Yeah.
And I think to me, that's how I maybe maybe what we can take away from this is not just the moment of turning your palms up, but the moment of what is your body saying to you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I think everything I tell my students, right, when they're writing their work, I'm like, when you write about the body is the most intimate thing we possess. It's also the most public thing that we possess,
Very
right?
interesting.
Um, and we sometimes take for granted our responses or our body responses, right? When we feel angry or sad or what all these grief, jealousy, it actually happens to the body first before it comes out,
Mm.
right? And so maybe it's about just slowing down and
Mm.
just keeping in check and realizing, okay, what is my body doing right now? Why does it feel like my heart's about to come out of my chest,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why do I keep going to our weird little quirks where we get anxious, right? We tap our fingers or we chew on our cheeks. Like, what's
Right.
happening? Why is that happening?
Yeah.
I think if
Yeah.
we can start catching those things at the bodily level, that's going to really make us more aware of ourselves and our roles within our world and how we can, respond to it. Right.
Yeah.
And I keep coming back to it. Maybe it's not about what we should do for others. I think, I remember when I was a monk, in Thailand. All Thai men at some point have to become a monk for the family. It's like a rite of passage. So I became a monk in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and I remember having this conversation about Buddhism. And even though I was born in a very Buddhist family, I I always consider myself to be the worst Buddhist, right? I didn't know why Buddhism was Buddhism. I didn't know the difference between my Buddha, who was really, really skinny, versus the Buddha of, say, Japan, Korea, like Northern school, right? And one of the things that he had said to me, that really made a kind of difference between the two Buddhisms, Theravada, Mahayana, Northern school versus Southern school, is that in Thai Buddhism, the end goal is that we we have to strive towards nirvana first before we can help people towards enlightenment,
Huh.
right? And I kind of, at first I thought, oh man, what a, that seems a little selfish. Like, you have to help
Mm-hmm.
yourself first before you can help others.
Yeah.
But then if you really start thinking about it, if your life is a mess, how can you help others?
Right.
Right? In what way can you help others at all? And so I kind of keep thinking about that. Like, I don't think I can make a difference until I can start seeing the things within me,
Mm-hmm.
right? That are perhaps something that is mirroring what's happening out there, and
Right.
try to understand that before I can start reaching out and say, okay, this might help you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's something that,
Yeah. Well, it's funny you said it. Like, if your life's a mess, how can you help other people? The thing is, like, if your life's a mess, no, people are gonna look at you and be like, I don't want your help.
right.
It's like, you can't even keep your own stuff together. Like, what, you want to help me? I'll pass.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I think what you said about being in the body is really important, especially with this posture of extending your arms out with the palms face up. It very much is, for me, physically, it feels like not just a gesture of surrender, but also of receiving.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
it's suddenly like, it's almost like you're communicating with your body. Whatever happens, it's going to be okay. And I am here to receive whatever lessons, moments of growth or insight are coming my way. And then we can just relax into that and just be okay,
Yeah.
instead of the gripping that we tend to do, where our fists get balled
Yep.
up, or our,
Yep.
like, shoulders get scrunched up to our
Absolutely.
ears, and you're all like, and then you're like, suddenly you're in a boxing stance with the one foot in front and you're ready to like punch somebody out.
Absolutely.
I mean, these are, of course, these are defense mechanisms that are just instinctual, but because that's without awareness and without, presence of
Yeah.
being in your body. And so some of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of the body is how you were talking about this word respond, which I think is very important to distinguish from react.
Yes.
And so how can we cultivate a response versus a react? Because I mean, you said it yourself, sometimes you act before you even have the awareness to catch up to, like, wait, don't do that yet.
Yeah.
So how do you shift from responding to, like, let's say you're driving on the road and someone cuts you off and you're like, that jerk,
Yep.
whatever, cut me off. How do you shift that into a response instead of a reaction?
That man, that is difficult. I mean, to take your example of saying getting cut off in traffic, right? Um, when that happens to us, when we're cut off, or when someone else does something to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Someone we don't even know, who is in a different vehicle, our reaction isn't a reaction to them. We've given them the control to get something out of us.
Yeah.
A response, to me, the difference is our response is something of responding to yourself, having a
Mm-hmm.
response to yourself, right?
So
And being aware of the situation you're in, right? Which is, you're in a car, you're going 45, 55 miles an hour, someone has just cut you off. You want to scream and yell and say obscenities and curse them out. But in the end, what is that reaction really going to get you?
good. Right.
right?
It releases energy.
It releases, and maybe that's good. But what I find though, after say, and I've done this too, where I've reacted, right, is that I carry that negativity. It doesn't go
Yeah,
away,
yeah.
right? And so then you carry that negativity when you get out of the car, and then
Hmm.
you're with your kid,
Hmm.
right? And then, say my 4-year-old does what a 4-year-old does to annoy me because they're because he's 4.
Right.
My Then that reaction carries over to how I react to him, right?
Hmm.
That's the thing about the reaction. There's a domino effect that I think can happen, is that if we carry that negativity, that negative reaction within us, it's not just that moment that happens, it continues happening,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then it becomes, well, when are you going to be aware of this of your reaction? When are you going to
yeah,
be aware of what you're doing? And sometimes
yeah.
for a lot of people, never.
Right, right. Their whole life is just a chain reaction of things.
Right, right.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. I love that example of what you shared in terms of carrying it, because I never really thought about the ripple effect of a reaction versus a response until you just pointed that out. Because I think about those times, because we're human, right? Those times when I do react to someone cutting me off in traffic or whatever, and then I'll still be thinking about that. Like, could you believe that guy?
Mhm.
And then whoever's in the car, you're like, you've driven like 10 minutes after the fact, and you're still like, I can't believe that guy cut me off, and like one of my kids might be like, Mommy, you're still thinking about that. And then that's when I catch myself and the awareness kicks in, and I'm like, okay, I need to like relax, and it's not the end of the world. And then and the other thing is that that moment makes it about me when maybe it really wasn't. Because I always say to my kids in that particular example, maybe they're in a hurry because one of their loved ones got rushed to the hospital. you know Maybe, we don't know what's going on in that car or whatever it is, but we make it about us, and then the world revolves around us. And so how do we shift our awareness from egocentric to more just being present?
One of the things I love, and what you said there, is that sometimes we need someone to call attention to it. Like when your daughter said, Mom, that happened like 10 minutes ago, right?
Yeah.
That's the moment where like okay, oh, okay, I think I've carried this on too long, right? My son has this thing where he says to me, Dad, you don't have the happy face on,
Oh, I love that.
right? You don't have the happy face on. And he says it when one, I'm wrapped up in a memory,
Mm,
or I read something and it just, on the news or on whatever social media that got me wrapped up, and he sees it on my face, right? Body. He sees it in my body, my
mm-hmm,
reaction. He says that, and I I snap out of it. And I think one of the things is that we spend a lot of time talking about what we can do, what the self can do.
mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things that is really vitally important too is to have people out there to help you see these things too,
Yeah.
right? To
Yeah.
call yourself up with it. And I think it's those people who we care and love the most, right? That could bring this out of us, right? And for me, this betterment of the self is not so much for myself, honestly.
Right.
It's to be better for them. It's to be, a better human being, to function with the people I love in a
Yeah.
way that, has positive energy that comes out of it, instead of this kind of negativity that is ever floating right around us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It just brings me back to what you were saying, in terms of being a quote unquote bad monk, and be like, wait, why do I have to go to Nirvana first? Like, like what about everybody else? But it goes back to what we were talking about before we started recording about the flight attendants are so wise to put your oxygen mask on first before assisting others. And I say this all the time, like, what good are you passed out in the middle of the aisle during an emergency when everyone else is like panicked, and then they got to take care of you passed out because you didn't put your mask on? It's like, you're not helping anybody, you're just a burden now.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So it's so important to think about this personal development, like the bettering of self in relationship to those around us, as not a selfish act, but actually in service of the people around us. And at the same time, there is this feeling of, okay, if I'm taking care of myself and that's helping others, then what else can I do? You know what I mean? Like there's this doing tendency that we have because of our culture, right? And we got to do instead of like, oh, I'm just going to be me, I'm just going to be here. But it's like sometimes people are like, that's not enough, I got to do more. So speak to that idea of balancing, if that's a thing, the being and the doing in terms of bettering oneself and trying to better the world. I mean, not to sound, so huge and magnanimous, but let's better the world by just being ourselves. But yeah, how do you see that in relationship with this pressure to do?
I think when I think of about doing and to be active or proactive, I always say you need to gauge within you what you're capable of doing, right? And for me, I love the classroom. I love teaching. I love writing. Writing is the way for me to figure out who I am
Mm.
and what I mean, and where I fit in this world that doesn't seem to be the right fit, but then there's no such thing as a right fit anyways, right? And so my way of doing, right, is that I have in front of me, 18 students, in a class that I should have important conversations about. But not only conversations, but allowing them the floor to speak, to facilitate that space, for them to speak their mind and engage them in conversations that are difficult, right? And so for me, that's part of my doing, right? It's something that I know I can do. I think my writing is not, and is completely a selfish thing. My writing, I'll just say it. I write because I need to. I write because I have questions I need answered. I write sometimes because I need to let loose on something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But can that also be seen as part of like being and taking care of yourself that then ripples out?
Absolutely. I think what's the scariest part of the writing thing, right? Where you take it the next step further is, well, you've written this.
What are you going to do
Are
with
you
it?
going to share it? Right? Are you
Right.
going to share that work? Right? Something that, say, came from a very self place, right? Am I, what would happen if I were to share this piece?
Yeah.
And oftentimes in that moment, I think it's a vulnerable moment, honestly, to share a piece of writing, to share any kind of art. But it's a moment of, thinking back of what writing is and what language is a moment of communication. I'm trying to communicate something I wanted to go beyond my own kind of mind and into the air, into the space of someone else, right? And that someone can either respond to it or not, but at least I've put it out there, right? And I think when we look at writing and poetry, right, it's this vulnerability that I think is so necessary, and also the thing that people fear the most, right? To share a vulnerable poem, to say a hard thing. And so in that doing part, that's what I can do. That's what I know I can do,
Yeah.
right? Is that I can give myself over in my writing more so than I can give myself over in person. There's
Mm.
something
Mm.
in language that I feel so much more comfortable with than my actual self.
So
Right?
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting because I'm thinking about how so every Monday I write a story and I publish it on Medium. I mean, you want to talk about sharing vulnerability. I mean, that's like it's like here, just take it, you know? Like I do it so often that I just like throw it out there and then I look away and I run away and I'm like, ah, will anyone read it? But this past Monday I wrote about writing the difficult thing. And I was taking a look at how anti-Blackness shows up in Asian communities, specifically in how I was raised, in the in my life growing up. And so I was thinking about that, and in light of like wanting to say it right, quote unquote, to not offend people. I mean, I think that's sort of the challenge of communication and of writing is how do I convey this story or this thing that I want to share in a way that people will receive it without compromising what I want to experience or share. Um, and but it's going to be messy. It's going to be inarticulate. It's going to fumble all over the place. Like, so what I don't want to say advice, but like what are your thoughts on that kind of communication where we talk about the difficult things and maybe someone's willing to listen, maybe somebody's not. I mean, again, we're talking about listening, but now we're on the side of delivering some kind of communication. And so how do you do that?
It's not easy. But I think one of the things that I keep coming back to, right, and because I teach primarily creative nonfiction. One of the things I keep coming back to is uh, announcing your positionality,
Mm,
announcing to readers who you are, acknowledging the privileged space that you occupy to write something
mm-hmm.
like this and share it,
Yeah.
to everyone. I think that's important too, and also to acknowledge the difficulty of what you're trying to write about,
Mm,
right? Um, I think, and to me, one of the things that draws me to writing is that in my writing, I can announce my flaws and be upfront with my flaws, right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, but I can also say, listen, I know this. I know my flaws. I'm trying to figure it out. I may not say the right thing, right? But could we have a conversation about it? But I have to announce that to my readers
Yeah.
first,
Yeah.
right? I think positionality is important because sometimes we get these essays about this is what you need to do, this is what we need to do as a culture, this is notice the inequalities and all this, of this stuff. But the readers don't know who you are,
Right. Right. Right.
right? They don't know the life you've lived. And I think to me, by saying this is who I am, and this is what I know, and these are the things I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But right, I think that opens it up for conversation. Right,
Yeah.
that opens it up so that readers don't feel like they're being written at.
Right. And that's important.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's how I think about it too. I think the more I think, because I have a lot of students who are privileged and white, and they want to talk about race and they want to talk about these things. Um, but I want them to also acknowledge where they are and who
Yeah.
they are. And I,
Yeah.
I am the same way. I need
Yeah.
to acknowledge that I teach in academia. I am really lucky to have this space. I'm really
Yeah.
fortunate to have this space of to write and have people listen, right, or
Mm-hmm.
read.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that. And I'm humbled by that. In fact, it's my humility, actually, in the end, that keeps me writing.
Mm.
And it's not the aspect of, well, I have something to say,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Um,
But you can have something to say too.
and be completely humble about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
I also think intention is important too,
Oh yeah,
because, I mean, including positionality, I mean, we could have somebody who's like a person of color and their intention may not be so beneficial to the collective, so to speak. So that's another piece I think can be revealed in whatever people are creating and sharing,
absolutely.
as far as writing or any kind of communication goes. So as you were talking, I was thinking about the poem that you read, at this reading we did at the Muse Center, the Muse Writing Center, and the one that was because,
Yeah,
you had this litany of because. And what I and for those listeners who missed the reading, it was a basically what Ira had said was this permission to vent, to express anger, and to release. And I thought that was really important to communicate, because the poem was really powerful, and it brought in both large and small things, as far as like, what are we frustrated with, what are we fed up with, and let's express it, let's lay it out on the page. And I'm thinking about how, sometimes we need that permission, to just say what we need to say. And this is beyond the reaction versus response thing. This is pure expression of emotions. And so how did you, using this poem as an example, how do you harness that kind of emotion and energy into art? Because some people, they want to, punch somebody. Some people, they want to, like, burn stuff. um Acts of violence. So what do you do when you feel this, I don't want to call it negative emotions, but these darker emotions, when they rise up? What's your way of managing, handling, whatever, doing with them?
I, what I can say about the piece you're referring to is called because the Ferguson verdict, which was my reaction to the ruling, um, uh, was was not to actually censor myself and just let it go,
Mm.
right? To let it go on the page. And one of the things that I hadn't done this, and I knew this was something that I think there's something going back to the body again. I hand wrote it. I didn't
Love
type
that.
it, right?
Love
I
that.
hand wrote that. And what I know, one of the things I love about handwriting, and especially in a notebook, is you can tell how hard you were writing and how mad you were writing from the
Yeah.
imprints of the words in the next page,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that told me a lot
Mm.
about my state of mind, was how hard I was pushing into that paper, right?
Mm.
And it, and for me, I just needed to let it go. Now you had said, like, what do you want to do when, if you have this urge to these, to hit, to burn, to do whatever, right? My thing is, you need to find the thing that this is what I tell my students: find the thing that saves your life, right?
How do you do
Whatever you
that?
do,
How do you do that?
find a thing that saves your life. It's a life, it's a lifelong pursuit.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
me, the thing that saved my life is writing.
Mm.
Um, and that's the thing I turn to. Now, punching someone, burning something down is not going to save your life.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you, what medium, what thing do you need to do that has saved your life, right? I know a friend who, what saved her life when she was going through dark times was yoga. Yoga
Mm.
saved her life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the thing, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's anything else. Like, how do you vent all this power? I think you just need to find the thing that you can do safely,
Yeah.
right? But still not censor yourself and
Mm-hmm.
allow these things to come out. And so when I wrote that piece, I didn't censor myself. I let it go. And the piece was, it's one large block paragraph that goes on for 4 pages, right? In the original, it was one long block paragraph that went for 10 pages,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
And so once I had done the thing that I needed to do to get everything out, then that writing mind kicks in, right? The other part
Yeah.
kicks in, the more
Yeah.
rational part kicks in and says, okay, let's find shape, let's find rhythm,
Mm.
let's find music now, right? Um, even our anger is a type of music though, when you think about it on the page,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I love that. I love that you make that distinction too between like the first initial surge of emotional charge when you're writing something, even if it's not anger, maybe like you're so in love with somebody, right? Or you feel so joyful. Like you get that surge and you're just like, I gotta write a poem. And then you write it down. And I have students that do this too. And then they're like, okay, I'm done. You know, they're like, I wrote the poem, I'm done. And I'm like, well, you kind of have to shape it. So I love that distinction between, you know, here's the raw 10 written by hand pages. Now the writing brain is on, and we're going to take a look at it and see how we can make some music with that, some shape. And I think that's a really important um, distinction to make between that raw energy. And what the analogy I like to give is like that initial draft is sort of like you vomiting the clay for the potter wheel, and then revision is you being the potter spinning that wheel and making it a pot.
mhm.
And
Yep.
then all my students look at me like, what?
Right. No. I call that I call it the discovery draft. Like
Oh, I
it's
love that.
not the first draft, it's the discovery draft because you're allowing yourself to put whatever you need to put on and allowing that subconscious part of the brain
Mm-hmm.
to do some work, to do a lot of the work, right? To
Yeah.
discover things that you hadn't known going into writing that piece. That's the beauty of writing, honestly, is that the more you write, and it actually happens more when you do it by hand, the more you
Yes.
write by hand, um, things will come out that you hadn't even known were
Mm-hmm.
there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's to me, it's those moments that heal actually
Mm-hmm.
more than the moments of like just venting it all out. It's those moments of like discovering something, right? And
Yeah.
then you go
Yeah.
on that road, you take that road and see where that leads you.
Yeah. I love that. I love what you said there because what I'm finding lately with my writing of poems is that I will sit down and I will start, right? I'll start with a notebook, a pen in hand, and I'll just start on, you know, maybe a phrase that I'm like, oh, that's interesting, or an image or something. And I'll just write. And I'm like, really? Do I want to write a poem? Blah, 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 blah. And I find as I continue, then something opens up, an unexpected thing pops out of nowhere. But meanwhile, it's the subconscious because, you know, 95% of our lives are run by the subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, oh, let's follow that. And I'll just keep writing. And then this whole thing unfolds that I never knew was coming. And so
Absolutely.
there's like so much magic that we conscious beings, which way are we using the word conscious? You know, we're not really present to because we don't make space for it. And I think that's the key. That's important for us to think about how we're being in our bodies, to think about like where language is coming from, is to think about space and giving space to the things that are inside of us that we're not even aware of.
Mm-hmm. In when I one of the trick, even if for me a trick that I do to my brain is that when I feel like I'm exerting too much control,
Mm.
right? One, I know something's wrong. Like I'm trying to hide from something. I'm
uh,
trying not to write something, right? One thing that I like to do is I turn off my computer screen and I
Ooh,
write without seeing the words that come out, right? Because
that's a trick
that
for sure.
way you're not bound by sight now. You're
Mm-hmm.
not bound by what you're seeing, and your brain isn't allowed to process. But now when you look at a dark screen as you're writing, right, you're just writing
Yeah.
and you're letting the brain take control and not the fingers, which I think is interesting way, because when I
Yeah.
look at, if I'm revising and I'm on the paper, my fingers tells me, okay, I'm looking at it and I'm telling, my brain's telling me, okay, you want to delete that. So you press, 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 press.
Yeah.
But when you shut that off, right, and suddenly what you're writing is coming directly from here. You remove
Yeah.
one filter, you remove one thing.
Yeah.
So
I like that. I'm gonna have to make that a rule at some point for my students, because what I find is that, and I, for my listeners who are like totally not relating to any of these student conversations, it's still a learning thing that you guys can take away. But what I find is that they censor themselves and edit themselves before the thing
oh
even
yeah,
emerges, right? Because they do everything on the keyboard, and I insist on writing by hand, and they're all moaning about it, and oh, it takes so long, blah blah blah. And I was like, but that's where the magic is. But some of them, they insist, and so they do their thing, and they're like, I typed this up, and then I was deleting, and I see them like sometimes pre-COVID, we're in the classroom, they whip out their laptops, and then I'm like, all right, we'll try this way, but then we're going back to writing by hand. But I see them pushing that delete key, and I'm like, you know, you're closing that door on possibility. So I like that trick of turning off the
turn off the
screen.
screen.
Yeah, with laptops, I think we'll just like tilt the screen down a little
Yeah,
bit and just, or even just like, I'll bring blindfolds to class.
absolutely. No,
You
that's a
guys
great
put some
idea.
eye masks on, go.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Oh,
Whew. Oh, Ira, this was such a great conversation. I really loved all of the stuff that we talked about. We talked a little bit about presence and being, communication and language, and writing, of course, writing. So I wanted to close our episode with a poem. Did you have something you'd like to share with the audience?
yes, I do. So this is a poem by the poet Ross Gay, and it's a poem that I encountered a few years ago, um, a year ago, and it made me think about the power of art. It made me think about what Claudia Rankine talks about when she says that as writers, we should begin writing counter narratives to what is already out there, right? And when I tell my students that, when I tell my students, well, write the counter narrative. What's the counter narrative? They always find counter narrative to be um, a pointing out of the injustice in the world, almost writing an angry poem or writing something that is
Hmm.
that is rhetorically charged, right? This one doesn't do that, and it's a small poem, and I find this to be a counter narrative.
Hmm.
It's called A Small Needful Fact. You know this poem? It's a beautiful poem.
Yeah. Oh my God,
Um,
Ross is my favorite person in the world.
a small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means, perhaps, that with his very large hands, perhaps, in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants which, most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-mm. Love that poem. Love that poem.
Yeah.
Ira, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciated it. Such good stuff. And for those of you who are curious about where to find his work, I'm going to put all his information in the show notes so you guys can find his work there. And That's a wrap. So we'll close the episode as we always do. The divine light in me bows to the divine light in you. Until next time, namaste.
Namaste.